Hello, everyone, and welcome into Talk Illini. We are the Illinois podcast for Orange and Blue News, part of On3 Network, and we are going to do a Know Your Foe episode here for the Washington Huskies coming up, as we have Roman here with us from Locked On Huskies. Roman does great work over there. You can go check out his stuff. Roman, let people know where they can find all your content at.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, JR, thanks for having me on. Really glad to be here. Yeah, if you're interested in any podcast work, over on Locked On Huskies, subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And then all my writing work can be found at uwhuskieswire.usatoday.com.
There you go. Great stuff over there, and definitely a good way to learn more about the Washington Huskies because they're a good team this year in the Big Ten. They may not have shown it as much against the Michigan game, but I would not take that game for granted at all, as this Washington team at home has been a spectacular team so far this season. Roman, I kind of want to start there. What has it been like for this Washington team? First year, they don't win a single game away from home, but they win all of their games from home in the Big Ten. And then this year, they've gotten a few road wins, right? You had the road win against Washington State. You had the road win against Maryland, I believe it was. That was like the comeback win, right? Yeah. So what's been the thought process of the road versus the home? How have things been different? What are your thoughts there?
We've seen a lot of growth is the number one thing for me personally, because I look at this Jedfish team last year and there are a lot of things that you can say, all right, I want to see this improve. I want to see that improve. And when you look at just what Jed has brought to the table, the number one thing last year was you didn't have an offensive line or a defensive line really to go compete on the road. You go look at some of the opponents in particular that you played last year. You had to go on the road to Indiana, Oregon, and Penn State. Just, a difficult trio of teams that ended up in the college football playoff. And I look at just where the biggest strides have been made this year. You've seen improvements on both sides of the line. I wouldn't necessarily say it's drastic from like a Kurt Cignetti Indiana standpoint, which I guess is the scale that we in the Big Ten have to grade on now. But I look at a lot of just what Jedfish and his coaching staff have done in what's now their second season at Washington. And I couldn't be more excited about where things are going, because you see an eye for talent. You see a lot of elite talent on both sides of the ball at the skill positions. And as things continue to grow and build up in the trenches, I think that that's something that has certainly shined through on the road this year. You were able to go out and beat a Washington State team that, hey, they took Ole Miss down to the wire in Oxford. That was really impressive. You're able to have that 20-point comeback win on the road at Maryland. This team has shown that they are really good and they have all the upside of a top-tier Big Ten team. There's just things that, it's not all the way there yet.
Has Jedfish done a lot of different things this year when they go on the road versus staying at home? I know Lincoln Riley, his big thing was he left a day early, and they were kind of revamping some of the stuff with the the time clock of the team. Have they done a whole bunch of stuff different this year than they did last year? Do you think that's attributing to that?
I would say that that's definitely a little bit of a part of it, where a couple of the different things was, Washington is leaving a day earlier now. They left on Thursday for the Maryland game, for the Michigan game. And another thing, which seems like a minor upgrade, but also probably does help out with a lot of these, 300-pound dudes, is they're taking a wider plane to give guys a little bit more space to lay out and relax and do all this sort of stuff on these, 4.5, 5-hour flights. So I would say that there's definitely a little bit of that. Another thing that Jedfish talked about doing over the summer is he got together with Seahawks head coach Mike McDonald and talked about some strategy, because the Seahawks are traditionally the team that rack up the most air miles in all of the NFL. So I really like that idea. And from someone in Jed who has spent so much time in the NFL, I thought that was a tremendous idea.
Yeah, I like Jed a lot. I think Jed's a good coach, and I think he's very candid at times in his press conference, and I really appreciate that from coaches when they're willing to kind of be honest like that. One thing that we can be honest about is Damon Williams is a spectacular quarterback for this Washington Huskies team. He did not look so good against Michigan. There were 3 interceptions in that game. However, I would not tell Illinois fans to expect that from him, especially playing at home where we just got done talking about it, but Washington's been kind of a different beast at home than they have been on the road, and Damon Williams has been a huge piece of that. I believe he had 400 yards passing and 100 yards rushing against Rutgers. Is that correct?
That's right. 402 and 136.
Holy cow. Which is just incredible that he's able to do that, number one, but does it against a conference opponent as well. So go ahead and talk with us a little bit about Damon Williams, kind of what happened in that Michigan game that was kind of uncharacteristic about him. And do you think that Washington is going to be able to adjust in this game against Illinois?
Yeah, absolutely. Where one of the interesting things is Jed Fish, one of the first things he said in his press conference after the Michigan game was he took all the blame. He said, I didn't prepare him well enough for this start. And he expanded on that on Monday, saying that, yeah, we don't turn the ball over. Demond is a high percentage completion passer, and turning the ball over 3 times is just very uncharacteristic of us as an offense. And it's one of those things where, JR, you referenced it perfectly when you talk about that Rutgers game. I think that Michigan, they just played really well in that game, and you go back and you watch those interceptions. The third one was certainly very fluky, where it goes through Denzel Boston's hands and lands in just in the arms of a safety who is laying on the ground. Like I've never seen anything like that before. And the linebacker made a really nice play on the first one, which is just a great read. And then the second interception was a miscommunication. I know I'm just rattling off plays at this point in time, but I think that I referenced that because it's not necessarily that it's all just super uncharacteristic of Demond. He's someone who has proven through 9, 10 career starts now that he is a high percentage passer who makes really good decisions with the football and has just proven to be as good with his arms as he is with his legs. And he's someone who I'm really excited to watch. Getting him outside of the pocket, which is something Michigan did a tremendous job of just not letting him do. And they weren't able to run as much zone read stuff as they like. And they weren't able to just get Demond in space. And when they were, those linebackers made really nice tackles and didn't let him get out and get into the open field. So when I look at what Jed Fish's offense is, so much of it is predicated around having a quarterback that can move, that can run, that can throw, that can do all these different things. And Demond, adding all of that on top of his arm talent and his decision making, just make him a perfect quarterback for the scheme. And it's shined through this year.
It has, and I think that in the games where you've seen Devon not run as well, he's been going up against really good defensive lines, right? You have
Yeah.
Ohio State, Michigan, and so it's going to be a real test for Illinois' defensive line to see if they can be able to contain in Demond Williams. And I think one of the reasons why that happened, correct me if I'm wrong, against Michigan was because Michigan did a really good job of taking away the run lanes for Jonah Coleman, which forced Demond Williams to get in containment as well, and so there was really no good option in some of those read options there to be able to do that. Jonah Coleman is somebody who started the season and I said was going to be one of the best, if not the best, running backs in the Big Ten. He started off the season looking that way, but here in October, it's not looked as good. He's still picking up first downs and stuff, so it's not like he's been bad, but you would expect more out of him. What have been your thoughts on Jonah Coleman lately, and how does Washington get him going more as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Where for anybody who isn't just like actually watching him and they're just looking at the box score saying, wait, I heard so much about this guy coming into the year. What's going on? He is still second in the Big Ten in yards from scrimmage. And Washington has done a good job in integrating him more as a wide receiver and just in the passing game as a whole. And that was something that he told us in the spring, in the summer, in the fall that he was really trying to get more ingrained with, was working as a receiver because he knows that that's going to help him out at the NFL level. But yeah, JR, you mentioned it perfectly because he hasn't gotten over 70 yards since Washington's week 2 game against UC Davis on the ground, that is. And I think that's something to certainly keep in mind because Washington has had some injuries along the offensive line. Left tackle Carver Willis has gone down. Left guard John Mills has gone down. And that hasn't made things easy for, running the football. But it's something where when we talked to Demond and a couple of wide receivers after the Rutgers win, and we asked about Demond as a runner, what was going on. And they all said the same thing. It's every team's game plan has been stop Jonah Coleman and see what happens from there. And, you mentioned Ohio State, you mentioned Michigan, when they have the athletes, not just on the defensive line, but at linebacker and in the front seven to get to the outside and contain Demond Williams when he's trying to run the ball, it's going to be a little bit easier to defend Washington. But that certainly isn't something that every team can say. And obviously, again, you look at the Rutgers game as a perfect example of that. And I think Carver Willis and John Mills might be back here soon, maybe even in time for this game, which is something I'm going to keep a close eye on over the course of this week. But as those guys come back, I think Washington is going to be able to just establish their will a little bit more on the ground as well.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the left tackle for Washington also went down the backup in that game against Michigan, didn't he?
Maximus McCree, yes, he did. That's right.
Holy cow! So yeah, if you don't have Carver Willis back for this one, you're on your third string at left tackle there. Definitely something you don't want to do for long in the Big Ten. Any team does. I don't think anybody's just excited to put their third string left tackle out there because the Big Ten, it's a beast, man. I mean, trying to go up against some of these defensive lines and everything. We'll talk through the rest of the offensive line for me really fast. You mentioned Carver Willis, John Mills, obviously John Mills. I believe he's a true freshman. He's been
That's
really
right.
impressive this season. What's the rest rest of the offensive line looked like? Have they really struggled without those two guys there? Are there some areas where there's some potential maybe, where there is some confidence growing? Or is this a situation where it's like, yeah, we need those two guys back as soon as possible because we're not really sure what we're going to do without them?
That's a great question because I look at John Mills was in a position battle with redshirt freshman Paki Finau, who's taken over for him at left guard throughout the spring, throughout the fall. And I think part of playing John is I think there are plans for him to kick out to left tackle as soon as next year when Carver Willis is out of eligibility. So I think getting him on the field was part of the game plan early on. And Paki Finau has been tremendous at left guard. I've been really impressed with what he brings to the table. Center Landon Hatchett has certainly taken steps forward this year, where he played in every game last year, but was 9 months removed from a torn ACL. So there were certainly some growing pains along an offensive line that was just pieced together through the spring transfer portal. And then at right guard is his older brother, Gieran Hatchett, who suffered an injury last year at Oklahoma that ended his season early. So he comes back to Washington, and he's been a steady veteran presence. I think both those guys have been solid, but the guy who, and I think it's unfair because the guy who might be the most improved offensive lineman in the Big Ten is Washington's right tackle, Drew Party. And he's proven to be a really solid player. He's gotten more flexible in the offseason, and working with new offensive line coach Michael Switzer has certainly been a big help for him. But this Washington offensive line has been at its best with all five of those guys out there. I know that's no surprise to literally anybody on the planet, but I think that you've certainly seen some more cracks shine through when you've had to play with a backup and then a third string left tackle. And even though I think Paki Finau is going to be a long-time starter along Washington's offensive line, there are still things where it's not going to look as smooth because John Mills, especially in the run game, has just been such a mauler that there's a little bit more of an adjustment period there.
Really good information. Appreciate you bringing that up and going through kind of the offensive line stuff, kind of part that doesn't always get talked about as much. So I appreciate that. Before we move on to defense, the receivers on this team, they're fantastic. I don't know if I have a big question on them, but just check in on them. What are your thoughts? I know that Denzel Boston is the big name out there. Got some good tight ends in the room as well, so you can kind of mix them in there. What's your thought on the pass catchers for this team?
I absolutely love this group of pass catchers. A lot of people, I think, have really underrated this group because for people who don't follow Washington very closely, it's Denzel Boston and then some other guys, right? And I think that's certainly fair, but Washington has had some injuries in the unit where Penn State transfer Omari Evans missed a couple of games. He's really starting to get back into the mix. Wide receiver Rashid Williams, former four-star recruit, suffered a collarbone injury early on in the year too, so he hasn't been back since then. He's probably not going to be back till after Washington's bye following this game at the earliest. And we've seen a couple of true freshmen in Desmond Roebuck and Raiden Vinesbright really step up and become important parts of this passing attack. And Roebuck in particular, who is not a very highly recruited player coming out of Marana High School in Arizona, has just been so impressive. He has the second most receiving yards of any true freshman in the Big Ten, which I absolutely love to see. He's just proven to be somebody who can win at all three levels of the field. He's elite at creating separation, not just with strength and route running and all these different things. He just understands where he needs to be at any given time. And it's shown where he was Washington's leading receiver against Ohio State. Him and Damon Williams have developed some tremendous chemistry. Their relationship goes all the way back to playing youth football together in Arizona. So they've known each other for a long time, which I'm sure helps in that regard. And then at tight end, I have some questions right now about the group. And it's because there were a whole bunch of injuries that were also suffered during the Michigan game. Tight end Quentin Moore, it sounds like he's dealing with a concussion and maybe something else, according to Jed Fish, after he had to get stretchered off during the second quarter of that game at Michigan. It sounds like it could have been a lot worse, and they still dodged a major bullet there. So that's really nice to see. And then third string tight end Kate Eldridge, who had also been operating as Washington's fullback, had a foot injury, and he's done for the year. So I look at the tight ends in this group, in this game against Illinois, and this group is really interesting to me because Decker DeGraff is a very talented sophomore. He was a freshman All-American last season, but behind him, the only two guys that are healthy right now are a pair of true freshmen in Baron Naone and Austin Simmons. And I really like both those guys. I think they have some really high upside, but I don't necessarily know how much they're going to be integrated into this offense right away.
Interesting. Yeah, I saw that that thing happen with the tight end that you mentioned there. Who'd you say? Quentin Moore?
Yeah.
In that Michigan game I was watching, and I was, man, you always hate to see something like that happen. So glad he's okay and glad he's back to practicing and everything like that. So let's move over to the defensive side of the ball for Washington. I think the spot we need to start at here for Illinois fans is the defensive line for Washington, as the offensive line for Illinois has improved throughout the season. However, there are still some concerns with with a couple of the offensive linemen that are not bad, but could still improve in a few areas to
Sure.
help them out there. What is the pass rush for this Washington defensive line looked like so far this season? I know Zach Durfee got hurt at one point. I believe he is back. Now he's kind of the star pass rusher for this Washington team, if I'm not mistaken. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so Zach Durfee just returned. He got hurt against Ohio State, came back this last week against Michigan, and having him off the edge certainly does change this UW defense. I look at where I want to see more, and it's from the interior. We've seen guys win in some of their one-on-ones where Illinois fans know Ryan Walter's defense full well and using the bare front to exploit one-on-one matchups across the defensive line, where we've seen guys like Tai Tauyungalele and Bryce Butler at defensive tackle win some reps and really grow and improve. Elenius Davis and Ontario Thompson are other names to know where they've been solid, but this unit is still looking for more up front. And it shown it can be disruptive. It had 3 sacks against a, granted, not that great Rutgers offensive line a couple of weeks ago, but I want to see more from this group, and especially I want to see more from the interior because it's been okay in spurts, but there's no consistency. And I think that's been the biggest problem where, JR, you talked about the Illinois offensive line. I think that this is going to be a really interesting matchup because Luke Altmaier, if he gets time to throw, I have questions about Washington secondary. I love the talent back there. It just hasn't gelled with injuries and a couple other things going on the back end. So I think that if Washington can find a way to get consistent pass rush in this game, it could be a deciding factor. I just don't know if we're going to see it.
Yeah, this is my next question. Actually, was you look at this Washington defensive line. If they are not able to get up pressure, how has the secondary? I know Alex McLaughlin. He's a safety back there. He's been kind of the star of the defense, getting a lot of tackles back there. But what does the pass coverage look like for this Washington team if Luke Altmaier is given time back there in the pocket?
First of all, Alex McLaughlin has just been so much fun to watch this year. I think that he was one of the guys on the transfer portal. I was like, this is going to be the guy. This is going to be the guy. So I feel great about that personally. But I look at the rest of this defense, and Tacario Davis missed 3 games with a rib injury. It's nice to see him back and healthy now. And if you look at some of the advanced metrics, he has been exactly what he was brought here to be, one of the best cornerbacks in the country. But there's just been so much underneath right now where sometimes it's Washington's linebackers and safeties. Just there's a lot of youth and inexperience and just guys that haven't played a whole lot of football together before this year in that group. So there have certainly been some issues there. I love Washington's duo of cornerbacks on the outside in Davis and Ephesians Prysock. I think that there's the rotation of cornerbacks at nickel between Leroy Bryant and Rashawn Clark has been solid. I think Rashawn Clark is a guy who is probably going to take over that position long term, and this coaching staff might want to move Leroy Bryant back to the outside, but they wanted to get him on the field, so he's been playing a little bit more in the nickel. And then I look at safety, and outside of Alex McLaughlin, who has been tremendous. He's been playing a lot in the box as well. McEllisteen has had his ups and downs as a 6-year safety where there was a coverage lapse that he was probably the guy that you put the blame for on film, where it turned into a touchdown for Michigan tight end Zach Marshall in that game. There have been moments like that, but between him and freshman safety Rylan Dillard Allen, who's also been playing a lot, there's a lot of talent on the back end of the defense. It's just with some of these injuries, things have been thrown around a lot where Clark and Davis both didn't play against Ohio State. And there's just been a lot of just issues on the back end that are starting to get cleaned up. But this is a week where they absolutely need to be cleaned up.
Very interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that Leroy Bryant because there was a game earlier this season. I can't remember which one it was. And I heard the Washington people kind of talking on Twitter about Leroy Bryant had a really bad game. And so I was curious
Washington
there.
State, yeah.
Washington State. Okay. So if I don't know if you know, but Hank Beatty, the star wide receiver for Illinois, he lines up in the slot most of the time. And so that's something that I ask a lot of these Know Your Foes about is who is your slot corner and what is your confidence level for them there. So it sounds like you're not super confident in Leroy Bryant, but it could be him moving back to the outside. And you mentioned Clark being there instead. What's your confidence level in Clark going up against a wide receiver like Hank Beatty?
So I think that we won't see Leroy Bryant on the outside until next year at the earliest, because having a pair of 6'4" corners on the outside is a pretty nice thing for this defense.
It is.
But yes. I do look in the nickel where it's been a rotation for the majority of the season. Like I said, Clark missed the Ohio State game with an injury, but he's been back since then. And there's still been a very heavy just mix of both guys at the group. I think that Rashawn is a little bit better suited for the position. I'm a little bit more confident in him because he's just got more of that quick twitch, that shiftiness in space that I know Hank Beatty brings to the table as well. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like because that really has been just kind of an opponent by opponent variant as to who is playing there because I think they like Leroy Bryant a little bit better right now as a tackler, but I think that Rashawn Clark has higher upside in coverage. So that's something that I truly don't have the best answer for in terms of who's going to see more snaps right now. But I know that both of those guys have their strengths.
It's such a tough position right now. I mean, with defenses changing, you almost have to have somebody that's a good tackler there, but they also have to have the coverage ability. They aren't valued very much in the NFL, but every time I look out there in the NFL or college football, if you have a struggling slot corner, whether it's in the run or whether it's coverage, it can be something that teams exploit a whole lot. So it's a very, very important position out there for the guy to be very versatile and do a ton of different things. The other part of this Washington defense are the linebackers, who they've struggled with injuries a little bit this season as well, if I'm not mistaken. I know Jacob Manu, he's been kind of in and out a little bit, and I think he's probably one of the better run stoppers. When I was listening to some coverage from I believe it was you and Lars talking about him a little bit, but what's your thoughts on the linebackers? Jacob Manu, is he going to play? Thoughts there?
So I don't believe Jacob Manu is going to play in this game. His situation is actually not injury related, or it kind of is, it kind of isn't. Is he spent 2.5 years at Arizona and then suffered a torn ACL in the middle of last season. And Jed Fish and this coaching staff are trying to get him a full extra year of eligibility. So they're just trying to go the traditional, or traditional air quotes now, redshirt route of playing only 4 games. And he's played in 3 already this year. He played against Ohio State, Maryland, and then last week against Michigan. So I don't know if he's going to play in this game. I feel like Washington might want to save him for Oregon at the end of the year. That's just kind of my personal preference when I look at how this schedule lines up, because another guy that the Huskies are working back into the rotation, especially after a season-ending injury to Buda Alukta at Washington State about a month ago, is freshman Zadris Saleh, who is the top signee in Washington's 2025 class, and this coaching staff is absolutely enamored with him. He's 6'2", 225 pounds, moves super duper well, but he is just also coming off an ACL injury that he suffered in his senior year of high school. So he's been back and been able to just get reincorporated into the defense over these last 2 games. And I think that he's kind of the guy where Washington is going to ask for more of him, especially in pass coverage, because he is such a fluid athlete, where guys like Devin Bryant and X-Ray Alexander have proven to be great run stoppers. And especially X-Ray Alexander, I love watching him come downhill at 6'2", 245 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. He is just the definition of a thumper. But Washington needs more from its linebackers and pass coverage. And I think Zadris is the guy that we're probably going to see more of in that role as the weeks go on.
All right, very good, very good. Well, that's about all I have for the positions of the defense. Any thoughts on the special teams? How have they been looking? The kicking game, punting game? I know this is riveting conversation that everybody wants to hear about, but hey, we're doing Know Your Foe. We got to ask about the special teams. What's your thoughts there?
Oh, absolutely. Where I've liked what Washington has gotten in terms of kick returns from Adam Muhammad and Jonah Coleman a little bit here and there. I think overall this unit has been okay, where Washington has done a good job investing in special teams. They have 2 full-time coaches dedicated to the position in Chris Petrilli from Purdue, the special teams coordinator, and then Greg Froelich, who's the special teams coordinator at Charlotte, who was brought over in just an assistant role. So those 2 guys have been dedicated to the position. I don't think that we've seen the true fruits of the labor there yet. Grady Gross has struggled a little bit. He's missed a kick in each of his last 2 games now. But I think that one of them, at least this last one against Michigan, looked like that there might have just been some kind of issue in the protection because it almost got blocked. So I don't know if that threw him off a little bit in that particular instance, but overall, I would give this unit like a C-. Like I think it could be worse. The grades don't agree with that. The grades have it as like an F right now. So there's still certainly some questions about the special teams unit right now. I think that one guy who I've liked what I've seen, but it's just been so little of that there's been some inconsistency involved, is with punter Luke Dunn, where he's got a really big leg. I know he had a 55 yard or something in that ballpark against Michigan last week, but he just hasn't been asked to do a whole lot this year. So we haven't seen a whole bunch from him, and he's been able to find that sort of consistency that you're looking for from any punter, but also it's also a great thing when you don't see the punter on the field, right? So you can't necessarily complain about that to a certain extent.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, hey, I will ask you about one more thing because I actually remember I did watch Jed Fish's press conference this week, and one thing that he was talking about was the difference of coaching in the Big Ten versus coaching in the Pac-12. You know, you run less plays.
Yeah.
He kind of slightly, I don't think he outright said it, but slightly kind of mentioned there's better coaching in the Big Ten, which I think it's the conference with the best coaches overall in the entire country. But I do think that he was kind of alluding to the struggles of, you know, getting used to the Big Ten, some of the more slow pace stuff, him being a guy out west who likes to run more plays. What has the adjustment been for him? Obviously, you can look back to last year as well with some of that stuff. And then obviously, Brett Bielema loves to do the substitution stuff with bringing players on and having his players come off a little bit slower to make the offense stay on the field a little bit longer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Jed, who people have to remember, he comes from the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree, where you do like to run that up-tempo offense and get to the line and run as many plays because you're going to find success doing that. And obviously that is a Pac-12 thing as well, right? Some of these no-huddle, just fast-paced offenses. And it's a lot of fun. And I don't think it's necessarily just a Big Ten thing. It comes down to the game script sometimes, where the game against Rutgers, Washington ripped off 16 explosive plays. They didn't run a whole lot of plays in that game either, but it was for a very, very different reason than the, traditional Big Ten sort of style. And I look at I think that there are still a lot of things that Jed Fish and his coaching staff are learning about playing in the Big Ten because, like I was talking about in the opener, last year there were so many things that went wrong in terms of personnel because when he got to UW, the cupboards were just so bare. There really wasn't much for him to build on going into this. So I think that to an extent, Jed and his coaching staff are kind of treating this like their true year one in the Big Ten in terms of, all right, this worked for us, that didn't work for us, because the offensive line just put such a stain on everything last year. I don't mean that to knock any of the players, but just the group itself was just patched together. They didn't have 10 offensive linemen to run during spring practice. They had 7 guys. And I remember just standing out there and they had to put trash cans out there at certain points because they just didn't have enough players to run with. So I think that that's something that he's still getting used to. And it's very clear that he is more than open to playing the Big Ten style of football of smash mouth. Yeah, we can, run it and control the clock and do all these different things. But I don't think the personnel is quite there yet for Jed to operate this offense at maximum efficiency just yet, because you have a tremendous trio of stars in Damon Williams, Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston. And this offense has proven to be good. It's proven to be explosive, but it's not everything that I think Jed wants it to be, a true elite team in the Big Ten just yet.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a shootout for all we know. This is going to be a really fun game, I think, and I'm really, really excited to watch it. I hope you're happy in the Big Ten, Roman. We are glad to have Washington in here. Glad to have you covering Washington, and thank you so much for coming in and doing this for us. This Know Your Foe. Do you have any final thoughts or anything on the game? Anything we didn't get to that you wanted to mention?
2 things. One, you were talking about nickel corners earlier. I just want to give a shout out to all the Illini/Bears fans out there for a, truly elite nickel corner that you guys got. And Kyler Gordon, wonder he's from. No, I'm just kidding. I absolutely love Kyler Gordon. And I just wanted to make sure I threw that in there at some point because getting a chance to watch him when he was out here playing in the nickel, playing outside was just truly a blessing. And the other thing is I'm really excited for this game as a whole. And for all Illinois fans out there, if you are trying to learn more about these 4 new schools in the Big Ten and you want to get out and take a trip to any one of these 4 stadiums, go to Husky Stadium first. This is one where obviously, it's going to be a couple of years before our 2 teams play again inside Seattle if you're not going to be out here this weekend for this game. But it is truly like Husky fans kind of like we call it the greatest setting in college football now. The athletic department has taken on that branding as well. It gets the name for a reason. Looks like it might be a rainy game here this weekend, so it might not be the full true experience, but this place can be absolutely magical. Highly recommend that every Illinois fan make the trip out here at some point.
Hey, we have the greatest setting in college football. We have the birthplace of college football over in Rutgers. I mean, we truly got it coast to coast at this point. I don't know what else you want in the Big Ten. The Big Ten has it all. to me. So really, really glad to have you on here, Roman, to talk about this. Everybody, you do go check out his work over at Huskies Wire, Locked On Huskies as well. Go follow Roman on all socials. Show him some love for coming on here and helping us out with helping us to learn more about these Washington Huskies. Roman, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate it. Have a good one, everybody.